Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Qi Zhi. Coming up in this edition, U.S. President Donald Trump says he and Russian President Vladimir Putin have agreed to begin negotiations to resolve the conflict in Ukraine. The European Union and Canada have pledged to strengthen trade relations after the U.S. said it will impose tariffs on steel and aluminium imports. And fighting has resumed in the Democratic Republic of the Congo after a short hiatus. We begin with the Russia-Ukraine conflict. A possible end to the 3-year-old Russia-Ukraine conflict may be on the horizon. U.S. President Donald Trump says he and Russian President Vladimir Putin have agreed to begin negotiations to resolve the conflict. Trump also spoke with his Ukrainian counterpart, Volodymyr Zelensky.
We had a great call, and it lasted for a long time, over an hour this morning. I also had with President Zelensky a very good call after that. And I think we're on the way to getting peace. I think President Putin wants peace, and President Zelensky wants peace, and I want peace. I just want to see people stop getting killed.
The U.S. president added that he could meet with Putin soon in Saudi Arabia.
We ultimately expect to meet. In fact, we expect that he'll come here and I'll go there, and we're going to meet also probably in Saudi Arabia. The first time we'll meet in Saudi Arabia, see if we can get something done. But we want to end that war. That war is a disaster. It's a really bloody, horrible war.
Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Putin supported Trump's idea that the time had come to work together. Following his call with Trump, President Zelensky said in a video address that he had substantive negotiations with Washington and believed that America could help with the peace process. The United Nations has welcomed the efforts. Meantime, European countries, including Britain, France and Germany, have issued a statement saying they had to be part of any future negotiations on the fate of Ukraine. The statement followed their meeting with the Ukrainian foreign minister in Paris. Trump's phone calls came on the same day that U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said that Washington does not support Ukraine's bid to join NATO. He also said it was unrealistic to expect a return to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders. For more, Poppin Putin sent this report from Washington.
Trump and Putin held a call for 90 minutes, according to officials, which is rather lengthy. And of course, it is expected that now we will see a more expedited timeline towards resolving the conflict in Ukraine. Trump did say that the conversation was lengthy and productive. And of course, right up until he actually was inaugurated, was saying that this was a top priority to resolve the conflict in that country. For the Russia's part, they also said that they are willing to go with peaceful negotiations to reach a long-term settlement. That is a slight difference in terms of emphasis, in terms of what that timeline could look like. But certainly these things are moving. On top of that, right after that phone call, Trump did get on a call with Ukraine's leader, Volodymyr Zelensky, who is very much, I would imagine, anxious to see what's going to happen next. The U.S. has departed slightly from the policy that we saw under Joe Biden, which was very much Ukraine and backing Zelensky. He was in the United States a number of times. And on top of that, there had been some notion that there could be a path to NATO. On top of that, we need to remember, of course, that Putin and Trump have had rather close ties. So we could see a little bit of a change in the dynamic. In terms of those phone calls, let's hear from the White House.
Secretary Rubio and also the Vice President, J.D. Vance, will be meeting directly with President Zelensky in Munich on Friday, and I'm sure they will provide a readout of that conversation and that discussion. Certainly, the president has employed a very strong team or deployed a very strong team to continue these negotiations. And the fact that he was on the phone with both President Putin and President Zelensky today shows that he's very much involved in this effort as well.
Hegseth, importantly, made a commitment to NATO, of course, a very important U.S. ally, but was quick to say that dependency was not going to be a part of the dynamic. So very much reiterating that while there's a commitment to resolving the conflict in Ukraine, in terms of the role of the United States, they want to take more of a backseat. There's not going to be troops on the ground, for example. They're very much keen on Europe solving this problem. And to that end, Hegseth did make it clear that there will not be a path to NATO membership for Ukraine. That is certainly an about turn in terms of this administration's stance versus the previous administration. So it will be interesting to see how that unfolds, especially as both NATO and the previous Biden administration had repeatedly said that a path to NATO membership would be possible. Let's remember, of course, that Donald Trump has repeatedly complained that NATO does not pay its fair share in terms of defense budget spending. And so we can see with this current policy and the expectation of how this conflict should be resolved that the U.S. is doubling down on exactly that point.
That was Putin reporting from Washington. In Europe, the European Union and Canada have pledged to strengthen trade relations after the US said it will impose tariffs on steel and aluminium imports. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is in Brussels to meet NATO and EU leaders. William Densler reports from the Belgian capital.
European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says the relationship between the EU and Canada is strong and thriving and hopes to strengthen it further. The EU is Canada's third largest trading partner behind the United States and China. But the meeting between senior EU leaders and Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on Wednesday was also an opportunity to discuss relations with the US. The Trump administration's announced a 25% duty on all steel and aluminium imports that is set to come into effect next month. While not directly mentioning President Trump, Trudeau and von der Leyen said it's now an unpredictable world. The two praised the success of the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, or CETA, that all but entirely eliminated tariffs between the EU and Canada.
Trade can be very beneficial and lead to a win-win situation. CETA has proven it. Indeed, since we have CETA, trade and investment on both sides have increased by 66%.
We've seen the creation of thousands of jobs, of tremendous prosperity on both sides of the Atlantic, and it's something we're very much talking about doing even more of in a reliable and trustworthy way.
But both sides are continuing to grapple with how to handle the prospect of a potential trade war with the US. Senior EU officials say it will take firm and proportionate measures, telling Washington that such actions won't go unanswered. On Wednesday, EU trade ministers convened to discuss how exactly the bloc should respond.
That was William Densler in Brussels. Meanwhile, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in Washington for talks with President Trump on trade, tariffs, and the recent deportation of Indians from the United States. The Trump administration has criticized India's high tariffs on American imports and plans to impose reciprocal tariffs on countries with similar duties. The US was India's largest trading partner last year. Ravinder Bawa sent this report from Delhi.
Well, for both the leaders and the nations, this is a significant visit. And on the one hand, where in India, a lot is being talked about the rapport between the two leaders, it will be important to see that how the two leaders are able to navigate the problematic space of tariffs. Interestingly, the main issues that are going to come up is, of course, trade tariffs is one of the key areas. Apart from that, there will be defense ties, there will be trade cooperation, there will be energy and technologies. Now, as far as India is concerned, India has already, created a little navigating space by agreeing to buy oil, American oil, by also in the recent announcement in the budget, they have reduced the customs duty on many parts of smartphones, high-end motorbikes. So this gives companies like Harley-Davidson or Apple the space to send or to sell their products here. These are the small steps which India has taken. India has also agreed to take back illegal immigrants, and only recently we saw 104 were sent back to the country, although there was an issue in the manner in which they were deported to India in a military plane and in chains and shackles. So that has been raised to America. But India has created some maneuvering space as far as accepting certain things are, taking certain steps. So now we'll have to see how much is Mr. Modi going to be able to push back the tariffs, because America has said that India is a tremendous tariff maker. That is something Mr. Trump has spoken about India, although he has not spoken anything bad about Modi. So that's the rapport on which a lot of Indian journalists who are there, or even the newspapers here, are talking that the rapport between the two leaders will probably help India to get some kind of leeway as far as tariffs are concerned. But definitely an important meeting as far as the bilateral ties of the two nations are concerned. And also in terms of trade, energy, we'll have to see how it goes. For both the nations, the common area of concern is security of the Indo-Pacific region, counter-terrorism.
That is Ravinder Bawa reporting. Turning to the Middle East, the clock is ticking fast as the deadline looms over the Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal. The US President and the Israeli Prime Minister have threatened to restart the war in Gaza if Hamas fails to release hostages by midday on Saturday. The Palestinian militant group earlier said it would not bow to US and Israeli demands given the alleged violations of ceasefire terms by Israel. But as Jonathan Regev reports, a recent change of rhetoric in Tel Aviv may be a reason for hope.
There is a feeling that this is sort of a negotiation pressure on both sides. It feels as if both Israel and Hamas are still keen to move forward with this hostage deal, and therefore the feeling, maybe the hope, the wishful thinking is that we will see more hostages being released on Saturday. This is what is being thought. On the other hand, we cannot ignore the fact that there have been mutual threats. Hamas threatening to stop the hostage release for now, Israel threatening the war to resume, and saying that all options are now on the table, and that if the hostages are not released by Saturday, then the war will resume. An interesting comment by Benjamin Netanyahu. He said, if our hostages are not released, he didn't say all our hostages. That's the terminology used by Donald Trump. So Benjamin Netanyahu clearly not saying that all 76 hostages should be freed by midday Saturday, but some release, meaning that if a certain number of hostages are freed, then Israel would perhaps not have the pretext to go back to war. I think everybody's still waiting to see what happens on Saturday. Again, there's a feeling, and there were reports this day coming out of Saudi Arabia, that things can eventually be arranged and this first phase of the ceasefire will happen. But there's also an understanding that it may not happen, so Israel is preparing. But are we seeing a very big emergency mobilization? For the moment, the answer is no.
That's Jonathan Regev reporting from Tel Aviv. Finally, in Africa, fighting has resumed in the Democratic Republic of the Congo after a short hiatus. Congolese troops are pursuing M23 rebels near the town of Usi in South Kivu province, as the anti-government group continues its advance in the east after seizing Goma last month. With large reserves of mineral wealth, the region has been a hotspot for armed conflict, causing one of the world's biggest humanitarian crises. Chris Okumringa reports from Kinshasa.
According to Congolese officials, the fighting broke out on Tuesday in a village known as Ihusi, about 70 kilometers from Bukavu, which is the capital of South Kivu province. Many people fled the area, and we're told that it was M23 rebels against Congolese forces with the allied militia. And the people in Bukavu are very worried about this intensification in fighting, and some people have closed their shops, others have fled the area. So there is a lot of panic in that area. And I spoke to a journalist in Bukavu who said that the fighting has stopped in that region. But we've also heard reports of fighting, very fierce clashes in North Kivu province, an area known as Kanune, which is near Lubero territory. We've been told the M23 rebels have been advancing, and that's despite the regional leaders' call for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. So what's clear on the ground is that this ceasefire is not holding, and both sides, the M23 and the government forces, are accusing each other of violating this latest ceasefire. We've also seen that, heard from international organizations that hospitals in Goma are still overwhelmed by the number of injured people. The UN has been calling on the M23 rebels to open the airport, which is the access area for food and other humanitarian supplies, but that has not happened. And so it's still a very tough situation for the people who have been caught up in this situation in eastern DRC.
That was Chris Okumringa on renewed hostilities in the DRC. Now recapping the headlines before we go, US President Donald Trump says he and Russian President Vladimir Putin have agreed to begin negotiations to resolve the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The European Union and Canada have pledged to strengthen trade relations after the US said it will impose tariffs on steel and aluminium imports. And the fighting has resumed in the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of the Congo after a short hiatus. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a one-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Qi Zhi. Thank you for listening.